Welcome everybody. I share the screen here with you. So I am in a wonderful state, the state of Berlin, sitting here on the River Spree, rightly here. And you can see some of our indicators are COVID-wise positive. Some of them are not so good in the moment, but I'm happy to present you today together with Michael. I will just make an introduction of a few minutes and then Michael will take over because he did most of the work together with Ang Lee. I'm not sure whether Al Capone, that's his Berlin name of Ang Lee, whether he is around. Ang Lee, are you in the round here? No, he's not. Okay, so you can see I am not only affiliated with Humboldt-University. We have been able to create together with the University of Zurich a so-called Blockchain Research Center, which is the second symbol on the upper right here. I'm also affiliated to our, which is the symbol on the very left side, to mainland China, namely to WISE, Wang Yanang Institute on Studies in Economics in Xiamen University. I happen to also be part-time engaged in Prague, and for some reason which I have to still explore, I'm also affiliated with NCTU, so that's what you see down there, Charles Weiss, NCTU. And today I'm happy to talk to you about the financial risk meter. Now, risk, model risk, systemic risk, they are very old topics. And the problem of systemic risk is, of course, the detection of systemic risk and the reasoning on the discovery of essential factors of what actually makes it in a network of interdependency and business cycles and financial market, what actually makes it a systemic risk. And there's this wonderful word by Justice Potter Stewart from '64. I know it when I see it, but that doesn't help. We want to see it before, actually. Things happen, and things happen for systemic risk, and in any risk measure will look at tails, but we have a very high dependency, not only among the network players, the nodes, but we have also nonlinearity in very high dimensions. And that is what leads us to look at many markets because we have this high dimensionality for our financial risk meter, which we have developed about 2-3 years ago, coming out of a paper of Journal of Economics called TNET, tail event driven tail event driven network risk, right? So you can look, we work together because it's all has been done in a so-called FinTech project. We work together with a company called FRM that is in Frankfurt. Yeah, this is the company FRM, and you can actually try out your financial risk meter via this little app here. If you want to see more on what we are doing, you can just go to the Humboldt Berlin app here, and you will see our financial risk meter as well for different locations in the world. And today we talk about Asia. Next Tuesday, we'll talk about emerging markets. That's done by Suhir. And today we are concentrated on the Asian market, and we have also the financial risk meter for cryptocurrencies, for yield curves, for Americas, and everything can be done live. Today we will concentrate on these markets here. You can see here this is the skyline of, right? It's exactly the skyline of Shanghai. This is Hong Kong. This is Tokyo. This is Seoul. And down here to the right, you see part of the skyline of this wonderful country, Taiwan. Yeah. And now, after the next 2 slides, I will give the talk to Michael. Michael, you are ready to talk after this one?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so I just show this one. This is the world, the geographic regions. But if you look at the GDP, and you fudge a little bit the colors, you will be arriving at a very important information. This is Europe, this is the US, there's the emerging markets, and that is Asia, has a very high GDP power. And now I let Michael take over. Yeah, so I switch my screen, so you have to take the screen now, yeah?
I have to share my screen, right?
That's right, yeah. If you could do that. Can you do that? Otherwise, I could just keep my screen and you just talk. Would you like to do that?
Let's try. Let's see. Let's try this. Up. Okay, I have to grant access to it. Oh, sorry.
Otherwise, we keep going with my screen, sorry, and then you just tell me when to switch.
Yeah, okay, let's do this just for
okay. No problem. I'm prepared to everything. Please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, we can go to the next page. And there we will have the standard, value at risk calculations. So, in our case, we are looking at returns of companies, company I at time t. And we want to see if the returns can be above or beyond a certain threshold with various methods. Now, this is company specific, just looking at one company. What we are interested in is the relationship later in a tail event, but first of all, the relationship vis-a-vis another company or maybe many other companies. And so if we look at the next page, here, okay, so it's a step further. So this is the quantile regression. So we could usually, or often a regression is being done for normal circumstances. But here in our case, we are very much interested in the relationship at the tail, 5%, 10%. We want to know what are the sensitivities of one company to another company in a tail event risk. So, and if we go to the next page, I think then it becomes clearer.
This one you mean, probably. This one you mean, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So if we were to do a linear regression for a specific, for a tau other than, let's say, 0.5, then a linear regression would give us this turquoise line, right? A linear line. But as you can see, if we do a piecewise linear quantile regression, the blue line, you can see that, and with confidence bands around it, you can see that for some parts, this linear turquoise line is outside the confidence bands, as would be estimated by capturing more the nonlinear features. And this is very important. We can see here that the linear regression does not well represent such tail event driven data. Now here we were just looking at two companies, and what is the technique? Well, first of all, you explain company I's returns with a matrix M containing returns to capture. And then once we have that regression, once we have defined alpha and gamma, now we can run a second regression explaining a company J at time t, right, with those inputs. And then we come to a value at risk calculation for company I, which we then take in a second step to give a conditional value at risk for company J, conditional on company I being at risk. Okay, and so we first calculate the value at risks for the respective companies, then we compute the tail event given a stressed risk factor, right? And so this is really the gist of this approach from Adrian and Brunnermeier. Very nice approach. Now we have detected a relationship between two companies. How about many companies, right? So we are in a financial system. We would have, take the Wilshire 5000. We could have 5,000 companies, and we want to know how each and all of them are related to each other. Now, so we take this a step further, and we say we take the log returns of company J and we constructed a matrix A containing M, which are macroprudential risk variables, such as the level of yields, the curve of the yield curve steepness, credit spreads, returns of equities, and so on. We have a list where you can, further down, where you can click on if you want to later to look at them, the macroprudentials, as well as all other companies' returns except for J. Okay, for a certain time window, and the time window is usually 63 days, representing, right, 3 months of business days. And in this application, we started with J is 15, so 15 companies in the case of Asia, because in the beginning of the time series we had few, and then later on we have more companies to look at. Okay, so and now we want to minimize the above check function, which is a check function that has, again, contains company J's returns, as well as the matrix A, but also a penalizing parameter stemming from a lasso regression. And here we're doing at a specific tau. So it is a lasso quantile regression, right? Specific for a certain tau level that we decide on, or that we want to study. And so, as you can see from this relationship, lambda, the penalizing parameter out of lasso, depends on the active set. So the spillover, it depends on the residual size, right? So which is then information on the tracking error size, and it reacts to singularity issues, i.e., the joint tail events, right? That impact all of the companies, and that's important. Now, if we rearrange a little bit, we can see that lambda. So, you directly see the problem of this relationship, right? Lambda depends on parameters which themselves depend on so on the beta vector, which itself depends on lambda, right? And so lambda itself depends on the residual size. It depends on the design of the matrix, of the condition of the design matrix. It depends on the active set. Now, how do we estimate lambda? We basically can rearrange, and I think the cross validation is next page, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe we skip to that one first. Yeah, maybe you should rearrange it next time. But yeah, so we have to estimate lambda j for each company, right? And we do this via a generalized approximate cross validation. So a cross validation that encompasses the level of tau, right? You see the check function in equation 3, dependent on a certain level of tau, right? With as well adjusted for the dimensionality of the fitted model. Now, again, this would be an estimate of the lasso of the lambda parameter for each company J in the set that we are looking at. And so you would have a distribution of lambdas, right? J lambdas at time t for a specific time window. And each of them can be ID'd, can be looked at. We know exactly who are the drivers, right? So if you look at the bottom part, right, some will be more the mid-range, right? Blue is kind of the median, but you see that there's some companies that have a high lambda. So if you go one page back, please, to page 16. Oops, sorry.
I'm not sure whether I can go back.
Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, no problem. And so what I want to say, so we estimate this lambda factor for each company, right? And gives us this, as we said, this lambda coefficient per company gives us information for a specific company. And now to calculate the FRM, we take the average of all J companies that we looked at to calculate the financial risk meter. Now, what is the methodology to do this over time? Okay, so you take a list of companies. So in the case of Asia, we took the market of Shanghai, Shenzhen, Shanghai 300, Hong Kong, the market index, as well as Taiwan. Right, we took the largest companies in the financial industry. We download daily prices and market caps, all in one currency. So, for example, you could take US dollar or renminbi. Then we sort them by market cap to obtain the biggest J companies. We calculate on those selected companies the respective returns of the stock prices as well as the macro variables. And then on each trading day, we select the biggest few J companies for a time window of S, so 63 days usually. We attach the macroeconomic risk factor returns. We calculate, as we've denoted before, lambda for all companies. Then we can calculate the average or 75 quanta, etc. And then we store it in a database so that we can further process this data. So here again for Asia, right? We took here 25 largest companies, 6 macro variables, and then we looked at various quanta levels. So you can denote, so we can see, if sensitivities are the same on average or in tail events. And we also looked at different time windows, okay? The macroeconomic variables as selected by Adrian and Brunnermeier were as follows. So 3 months to front-end yields, right? As more or less set by the central bank. The yield curve slope, so the front part versus 10-year out, right? Which has a certain amount of risk premium that the market wants for this maturity risk. TED spread is simply the spread of short-term credit over government spreads. Credit spreads is simply BAA rated corporates versus government spreads. And then here we in the case of Asia, so or put it that way, Adrian and Brunnermeier, they took the S&P 500 returns as well as the VIX, which is forward-looking implied volatility on the S&P 500. Here in the case of Asia, we took FXI, which is a general market of large cap in China. And for this one specifically, there's also an option market available. And also, given that an option market is available, there's also a VIX version on the Chinese market. It's not as liquid, but it goes the same way, and it's called the FXI. Okay, now here we go. We calculate all the little lambda J's, right, for these 25 companies across the time window that we see up there. And you can see how we have a distribution, first of all. We have an average that moves up and down. We can study, basically the width or the dispersion, let's say, of lambda J's. We can look at the maxima, the minima. For example, in 2019, there's a spike. We want to know who it is. Okay, apparently there's something in the returns of China Life Insurance. We could look at that day and into the design, into the active the adjacency matrix, compiling all the different beta vectors of these companies, and we can see where this influence coming from. Right now, let's zoom in a little bit into 2020, right around the crisis, most interesting for us, and we want to see whose lambda is high. Now, if you think about it, what does it mean if a company has a high lambda? It means that the lasso parameter is high. If the lasso parameter is high, it basically set to zero many of or more than for other companies of the beta vectors individual marginal return contributions. So basically in a nonlinear way, only keeping the most important betas that robustly explain this company's returns for a given tau, right? For a given tail event. And so this is again important. So if a company has a high lambda, it means it's basically highly dependent on certain other companies, and we would have to look into detail why it's important, who is influencing this company's returns. Right? So this is basically the gist of the lambdas. Now you can play this over time, right? And you can see the nodes that influence. I think here it's in orange we have China Life as one of the most important factors for Chinese equity markets, and you can see across time who is influencing that company, and what are the marginal return contributions stemming from China Life onto other companies denoted by the arrows, as well as the size of the note denoting what the centrality. Now we can also look at the macroeconomic risk variables across time and see which ones have an influence. So again, we have to denote for what tau, in this case 5%. And we can see across time that, for example, the TED spread is an important contributor of explanatory variable of returns for all these companies, as well as the Chinese version of the VIX FXI, right? You can see it's relatively high on average, and then to a lesser extent the other companies. Okay, so here we have it as well in
smooth version.
In a smooth version, so it's a little bit more perceptible, but you can see TED spread is important. Now, on each and every day, if we take each company's beta vector and put it into a table, as we did here, so by row, here, for example, we have, for example, ICBCAS, can't remember which bank this is their returns.
It's my bank.
Yeah.
My Chinese bank.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. So its returns are explained robustly, right, after Lasso, by China Life, Shanghai, I think this is a construction company, industrial bank, and then Ping An.
Sorry, it went back. Sorry, I cannot go back now.
Can I go back? Okay, good.
I can, but then I have to stop for a second. I have to. This is a little bit wrongly designed.
Okay, good. Okay. Now, so we see that its returns are explained by basically four other companies, right? And the bank itself has influence only on one other bank, CCB. Okay. Yeah. Now there's another interesting fact. I left it here like that. You can see that some companies appear twice, so they are listed on the one hand in China, on the other hand in Hong Kong. I just let it like that just to see if there's any difference in beta vectors. They should be the same, I thought.
They are.
You see something interesting. China Life, depending whether it's listed in Hong Kong or China, has negative, so at a tau of 0.05, right, 5% tail event, to Ping An Group of minus 0.15 to Ping An Group listed in Hong Kong, and 0.33 if both are listed in Hong Kong, right? So and so this is an important factor, right? So it's something that a regulator would need to study. Is there a market perception of systemic risk, for example, depending where it is listed? This is one thing.
We have 23 minutes consumed already.
Okay, and then I just want to point on the very right-hand side. What I put here as well is the part of the beta vector that contains the macroeconomic risk variables. And you can see that here we look at the tau of 10%. Overall, importantly, the VIX is an important explanatory factor.
This one.
Right? And maybe the slope of the curve. And if we go further down, you can see that that returns are mostly now explained by, or robustly explained by China Life, being one of the biggest companies in there. And if we go even tau of 0.5, next page, you can see it's very concentrated. So a regulator would say, on average, I need to make sure that China Life does well, because China Life has a large marginal return contribution on many other companies for various taus. And so if I want to stabilize the system, I need to definitely make sure that China Life is stable. Second thing is, in terms of macro risk variables, if the VIX goes up, I need to make sure to, let's say, forward-looking, calm down by central bank speeches and so on, calm down the market so that risk perception is lowered and forward-looking implied volatility is lowered. And so then this would have a muting impact on systemic risk for these companies. Now on the next page, we did one thing. We added one more macroeconomic risk variable, and this will be part of this paper that we're writing. we want to study which other risk variables have an impact and at what tau. So now here again, tau 05, same date, right? 29th of April, one of the highs in the FRM that we looked at before. And you can see that the credit spread defined as single A rated corporate bonds in China above the respective government bond, right, as a credit spread, shows you an impact, especially if you look at the banks, so diversified banks, one real estate company, and also health and life and health insurance companies. Okay, so we know that at a tau 05, credit spreads does have an impact, especially for some banks. That's one important factor. Now, if you look at the next page, we go to tau 10, right? We can see, okay, it's still concentrated with diversified banks. Tau 025, one bank, HSBC, okay, it's a foreign bank. And then if you look at the tau 05, next page, you can see,
5 minutes.
Yeah, credit spread doesn't have an influence anymore. Okay, so there's also a sensitivity this is to exemplify the sensitivity of some of the macroeconomic risk variables depending on tau. And so this is an important factor. So sometimes maybe on average, the credit spreads apparently doesn't have a huge explanatory factor, but maybe partially in a tail event, some of these credit factors would have an influence. And so for a regulator, again, credit spreads seem to have an impact. So they would have to calm down the bond market as well by saying, okay, we will stabilize corporate bonds. We will make sure that credit spreads won't go bonkers, and so that it does not impact the forward-looking profitability of Chinese banks, especially, and potentially also insurance companies. Now, if we take this adjacency matrix, we can look at the usual centrality measures. Here we took eigenvector centrality, plotted versus, in blue, the FRM Asia index, right? And you can see over time there's somewhat of a relationship, not strongly. Maybe the out degree. Here we see, okay, out degree basically which nodes are being influenced, or how many outgoing arrows, let's say, in the film that we saw before. Across time, you can see that, you know, obviously if FRM goes high, right, there's many certain outgoing degree centrality that we can measure. There's somewhat of a negative relationship, and we looked at, yeah, there's various measures of centrality. Maybe we can skip over them, so this is something that we want to study as well. And you can also see that the FRM Asia can be calculated obviously for various tau, 5%, 10%, 25%, 50%. You know, the magnitude is different. So if we were to normalize, this.
No, that's Raphael.
Yeah, if we were to normalize this.
Raphael wants to warn us with his siren.
then you can see that the dynamic are more or less the same. But again, as we denoted, the design made
you have to have some discussion.
Okay, and then last one, just encompassing the sensitivity. So the top and bottom lambda J's on a specific date, so April 2020, and you can see there were some companies that were low risk on average, but high risk in tau 5%. And so this is basically the outlook. So what we want to study especially is more macroeconomic risk variables, maybe liquidity measures, other things, and I would be very happy to hear from the colleagues here in the talk.
That's the guy.
Other risk variables that you have, please email me. We want to check them and construct a robust a model where we can give a recommendation basically and say, look, you know, if you want to stabilize the market in tail event in Asia, look at specifically, I don't know, some liquidity measures or some yield curve measures, some risk spread measures.
So Rui Ren is the boss of the FRM production line. Yeah, just to tell you. And Michael, thank you very much. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Professor Härdle. Are there any questions? I think we still have 1 more minute.
Yeah, I would have a question. Can you hear me well? It's Florentina here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
So thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Michael, for the nice presentation. I think your empirics are very meaningful for the systemic risk literature. I've rarely seen such a comprehensive study, including also so many and with so much care for the macro variables. However, I would like to talk about the technicalities of the risk measures you use here, right? So actually, by model construction, you look at the contagion in quantile risk. As far as I could see, your model is based on VARs, values at risk. And just my concern in general with this literature is that there is the conditional value at risk, actually cross-section, across companies. Okay, so a little bit, I see a gap between the regulatory purpose when it comes to credit risk, to risk management and risk measures. The VAR is highly criticized, of course, because we ignore all the losses beyond the quantiles in general, and because this sort of contagion, tail contagion type of models, we do not take into account the shape of the loss tail. So I would be very interested to know, can your model properties be extended to expected shortfall? Oh, I see here spectral risk measures. I think
Exactly.
I missed the point.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I missed the point.
This is the next step we're looking at, to make it an expectile version.
That's right. The expectile is like the expected shortfall, right? We are aware of that, but
that's
took sort of a helicopter point of view, or you can call it a U101.
That's very good. So we extrapolate towards.
We did it for this red line. Everything we did for this red line, but we'll do it for this blue line. That's exactly your expected shortfall.
Yeah.
Because this looks nonlinear, but in fact, in statistics, the things we want to say, everything is expansion, a little bit of common sense. That means, in fact, this Lasso quantile regression is nothing else than weighted least squares, where the weights depend on which function you use, either the black one, the blue one for the expectile, or the red kinked one for the quantile. That's all.
Yeah, I
so
it's
our technique is nothing else than weighted least squares on lassos.
Okay, so that's very nice, because then we end up with a coherent systemic risk measure, and that makes everything much nicer to be solved. I wonder if we can go into the world of extreme value theory, and we assume Pareto types of tails. Have you seen any study out there that links the size, so the severity of losses, or the shape of the loss tails in there? So I would be interested in building a risk measure where the psi in a Pareto distribution, the loss tail actually can be linked, because I can imagine that the shape of the tail losses can also have additional explanatory power on capturing systemic risk.
Yeah,
I just wonder if you know literature on that. I would be just interested for myself to learn.
This literature is unfortunately a cul-de-sac, and we always call it in Berlin the Zurich math finance one-way street, because it's only one-dimensional. You cannot do extreme value theory in high dimensions. That's why you have to nail it down to something that allows you to look for covariances, right? And that is exactly why we get not a risk measure, we get a distribution of co-stress measures. Yeah, and only the average of the co-stress measures that gives us the FRM, right? So this whole thing, right, is our the riskiness distribution of each and that is the wider view above the extreme value hype. From the 90s,
I see.
I agree. Of course, everything is tail event, tail behavior. But when you look at the data, you have to take into account the covariance and the joint dependencies. That's why we like COVA. That's why the Brunner-Meyer thing is very well accepted at central banks, as far as I know, at least at Bundesbank last year. Adrian was there and gave a talk on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
The version is in works, right? So to account for that.
Yeah, maybe Bailey or one of your students.
Okay.
Maybe Wei
I-
Li wants to work on it.
Maybe. I don't know if Wei wants to work on it. He's into machine learning, but I'm just interested in these econometrics behind that. So I was not aware that we cannot link the size that easily as a non-mathematician. But yes, I'm teaching risk measures, and I know all these politics around. So this is a very meaningful paper.
Yeah,
One of
this
the
is
best I
this
have
is
seen.
this is M2L.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but we
Yeah,
need
we
to
are over the time. Yeah.
proceed to the
Thank you very
to
much.
the next talk.